Welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. Okay, we are in the studio today with Calloway County injury attorney Jeff Roberts. And Jeff, you handle a tremendous amount of workers' compensation cases. And so today, what I'd like to talk about, if you don't mind, are injuries related to electrical situations. Sometimes these are shocks, sometimes these are burns, and other electrically oriented injuries. So first of all, welcome. Good to talk to you again.
Good to see you, Jim.
Absolutely. So I think, the people who may work in a plant or on a job site are familiar with something called Lockout, Tagout. That is a process, that is a system that's been in place for many, many years. Do you want to explain that to somebody who may be unaware of that situation? Maybe this is a family member who's wondering kind of what happened. So let's talk about Lockout, Tagout.
Sure. As I understand the process from talking with several people and doing some research on this before, a lot of times, and I think it's a requirement from OSHA, is when a maintenance person is working on a machine, they will throw the power to that machine so that it does not have any electricity going to it. The machine should not be able to come on.
It's like tripping the breaker in your home.
Very similar. Yeah, so you're turning the power off to that machine, and when you do so, you put a lock and tag on that so that others that come will see that machine is off, and it's off for a reason. And they don't come, and they should not come and turn the power back on to that machine. As I understand the process, the person who turns the power off is going to be working on the machine is the one who puts they have their own lock and tag that has their name to it. And then unless you're that person, you're not supposed to bother that. And
it's a safety protocol.
It's a safety protocol. Because unfortunately what was happening is other people would come by, didn't know the machine was down for maintenance, turn the power back on to that machine, and then the person working on it didn't know somebody turned the power back on it and touch a live circuit and get injured severely. It's a safety procedure to keep that from happening. But unfortunately, some companies don't follow lockout tagout like they're supposed to be following lockout tagout, and they don't train employees on it. So someone else who comes by and sees the machine's turned off, and even if they see the lock on it, they don't realize what it is, and they think, okay, that machine needs to be turned on because I got to start running parts, and they turn the power back on. They're the ones who remove somebody else's lock and tag, and then someone, the maintenance person working on the machine can be severely injured. Electrical injuries can be very, very devastating and life-altering injuries.
Right, and we'll talk about those here in a few minutes. And sometimes the cheap way to do that is if there's an electrical cord. Sometimes people are just going to unplug the cord, which again is outside of the normal procedure of that lockout tagout safety protocol. If it's a cord that's just out of the socket and somebody walks up and goes, "Oh, hey, I need to plug this back in." And again, now we're back to this electrical injury. So, again, there's a lot of different ways it can happen, but ideally that plant has trained the employees properly, and there's a safety team, and this is reviewed in the team meetings and things like that. Because again, as you said, the consequences can literally be devastating, if not fatal.
Yes, in the employers, manufacturing employers definitely need to be training their employees in the proper procedures in that regard, and that they should not be plugging something in. If they didn't unplug it, they shouldn't be the one plugging it back in, or if they turned the power off, unless they're the ones that turned that power off, from whatever means, they should not be the one turning the power back on, unless and until they've cleared it with everybody.
That makes perfect sense, because again, these are inherently dangerous situations. Let's talk a little bit about when there's a shock, when somebody incurs a shock, an electrical shock. Obviously, neurologically, there can be some very significant injuries. You want to talk about that first, because that's a little different than what some people may think is actually going to happen.
Yeah, a lot of times people think about the burn from the electrical shock or the electrical injury, but frequently people who have electrical voltage go through the body because they're touching a live circuit, they will have it affects the body in different ways for different people, depending on the amount of voltage and things that are going through the person's body, and it can cause some neurological issues, some nerve injuries. To where, sadly, I've had clients who've had these situations who had very great difficulty walking in using their extremities in any regard, their legs or arms, because of the effect of the electrical shock that they received, and it's damaging parts of the brain, parts of the nerves, and it causes movement type disorders. I've had clients who've had difficulty speaking as a result of that. Some who've had tremors from electrical type of injury. So it can cause some very serious physical injuries.
Cognitive disabilities.
It can cause cognitive issues for the individual as well. Which is basically the functioning of the brain and the person being able to understand and remember and apply information. Significant electrical injuries can definitely be totally disabling for individuals, and unfortunately life-altering for individuals, and sadly sometimes can be very fatal.
Yeah, and we'll talk about workplace fatalities here in a few minutes. So we've had a neurological injury here that can also lead to a loss of use. I mean, if enough of the nerves are damaged, there's a chance the leg or the arm or the hand or whatever, it just doesn't work anymore, right? It's not that it works in a limited fashion. It's almost like having an amputation. It's just, I hate to say it this way, but it's almost a dead limb. It's an unusable limb.
Well, you can have situations where loss of use, partial loss of use, or total loss of use. When I was talking earlier about people who had difficulties using any of their extremities, they could eventually walk, or they could walk, but it was at a very slow and unsteady pace.
Yeah.
The individual tripped a lot. And had problems with stumbling from that standpoint. And in fact, if you didn't know what was wrong with the person, you could very easily think this person's had way too much to drink. But the person's completely sober. It's an injury that had happened to them a year prior or whatever that's causing the problem that they're experiencing. And frankly, we haven't. That's a partial loss of use, but it's a loss of use of such severity that individual could never go back to work.
Right, exactly.
From there, so even a partial loss of use can be totally disabling, but it can result in a total loss of use of certain body parts at times from there. But also, it can, especially with these types of injuries where the person has loss of use or significant decreased use of their body parts or their extremities, it can cause psychological problems for the individual, not just the cognitive side of it from the electricity going through the brain, but the effects of that. The client that I'm thinking of several years ago who had the difficulty walking and difficulty using their arms. It caused a lot of psychological problems for them because they could not do what they'd been able to do before.
Right. So you've got not only depression, but probably some other issues that they're probably thinking about.
Yeah, depression, anxiety, both come along. A lot of people who have these serious injuries, especially if they are the primary breadwinner for their family, then they come into they start worrying, how are we going to make ends meet? Are we going to be able to keep her home? Am I going to have to sell my truck? And there's a lot of those type of things that come in and affect the person from a mental health standpoint, cause depression, cause anxiety. And then, if they have the visual effects that other people see, then they want to isolate. They don't want to go to the grocery and shop because they're afraid people are going to say, well, it's 2:00 in the afternoon and this guy's already drunk, when the guy hadn't had anything to drink at all. And so
that stigma.
That stigma, and then they, unfortunately, sometimes people look at them and they'll look at them with, and you can tell by their expression what they're thinking, and so in that weighed very heavily on this client that I'm thinking of, and so it affects all aspects of the person's life, not just their work life, but their home life, their mental health, and a variety of things. It can be very, very devastating.
Well, so from a workers' compensation standpoint, obviously this is, happened on the job, so Kentucky workers' comp laws and benefits kick in. How do you account for the psychological issues related to this injury? Because, again, it's not a physical injury, but it's a psychological injury. How does that play into the benefits and the claim that you would make on behalf of the client?
If under Kentucky's workers' compensation law, a psychological injury is compensable if it is associated with a physical injury, or physical trauma of some sort. So if it's from an electrical shock, and then you develop the psychological issues, even the psychological issues of worrying about bills and all of that, that is a compensable part of the workers' compensation claim. Now, just normal stress of working with no physical injury that causes problems is not a compensable workers' compensation claim. There's got to be a physical component to that. As a general rule, you pursue that similar to the other. First, you make sure they're getting proper treatment and get as well as they can be.
So this might be under the care of a psychiatrist or a psychologist or some other kind of mental health therapist?
Yeah, a combination of the two. From my standpoint and what I've seen over the years, there are certain situations and certain medicines that are very, very beneficial. My experience is that counseling with a well-qualified psychologist is very beneficial for individuals that have had life-altering injuries as well. And so getting the proper professionals from a treatment standpoint involved to treat the condition. The physical injuries, they're most likely seeing a neurologist, and if they have burns, or seeing a plastic surgeon or a burn specialist from that standpoint. And by the same token, they need to be seeing specialists in regard to the mental health effects of the work-related injury as well. And then we would go to those treating specialists to address the restrictions caused by the psychological injury, and then the impairment rating caused by it.
And unfortunately, I think a lot of people may be a little hesitant to talk about the psychological effects. I mean, there's some embarrassment there. And, I'm a tough guy. I shouldn't be putting up with that, or I shouldn't be worried about that, but I am. And sometimes those situations go unnoted by the client. They don't really bring them up to you. And it's an important part of the case. I mean, they should, right? I mean, this stems from the actual injury.
It does, and they should, yes, but you are correct.
That tough guy persona, you shouldn't have to worry about that.
Exactly. And, unfortunately, I think in this country, we tend to, downplay is not the right word, I don't think, but we at least don't look at a person suffering from depression and anxiety the same as a person suffering from a physical injury. And that's, unfortunately, that's just been historically correct and been looked down upon. You need to just get over it type thing when you can. That's just not possible. From there, and from my experience of doing this for 30 years now, I talk to the client, and if they've had a life-altering injury, I will ask them certain questions to see if it's affecting them from a mental health perspective. And really, one of the best things that I've found is talking to their spouse.
I would think so.
And because a lot of times you don't realize that you're more irritable than you used to be, and that you lose your temper quicker than you used to lose your temper. You don't realize that you're isolating yourself at the house because you've got in your mind you got really good legitimate excuses on why you don't want to go places that you used to go and used to enjoy doing. So the spouse can be very, very helpful in confirming that, yes, there is a psychological condition or psychological issue going on here, depression, anxiety, panic attacks, whatever it may be, and then can be a very good advocate for convincing the injured person to seek out that medical treatment as well. And at least in my experience, me having the conversation with the client also and telling them, look, I've had other clients that have felt the exact same way you have, and I can tell you that after they've been to mental health counseling with a very well qualified psychologist, 6 months down the road, they were thanking me for telling them, you might want to get that checked out. You might want to see about getting treatment for it. And even if it does, it may not have, and probably won't change all the circumstances of their what they're going through. Seeing a psychologist isn't going to change their worry on how they're going to pay bills because they still got the physical injuries and things of that nature, but it affects their ability to, or it changes their mindset to some extent.
It makes it easier to cope with the situation.
Correct.
Yeah, which if that goes untreated, can lead to some pretty devastating outcomes, unfortunately.
Yes.
If depression really sets in.
True.
Jeff, we've talked about some neurological damage. We've talked about some psychological damage. Let's come back to the physical damage that might be present in kind of what happens when you have a severe electrical shock or burn. Obviously, there's going to be probably a number of surgeries, possibly skin grafts and things like that involved. And that always, we've talked in previous episodes about, the surgeries have to go and all of this has to happen because you've got to reach maximum medical improvement. Do you want to define that for the audience real quick, what that term means and why that's relevant?
Maximum medical improvement is basically a term that is used to describe when a person reaches a plateau in their recovery. It doesn't mean that there won't be gradual improvement over time, but there's not expected to be any significant improvement in their condition for the next year or so. A lot of times people will improve over time just from the simple fact that they start unconsciously avoiding things that aggravate their condition so they don't have as many flare-ups, for instance. But it's basically where the medical treatment has reached a level of improved the person to where they think they're going to top out. And they may still be getting treatment to maintain where they're at and keep them from getting worse, but they don't expect significant improvement.
And again, maximum medical improvement, MMI,
Correct.
is what that refers to. So surgically, medically, we've done about all we can do. And at that point, that makes sense. But, sometimes it can take a very long time to get there,
Correct.
especially if there are subsequent surgeries and surgeries that have to come on down the road. And obviously, if you've ever been involved in a burn or something like that, there are numerous surgeries. Let's talk a little bit about how that gets covered under Kentucky Workers' Comp. We have something called lifetime medical, but it's not that simple. That law has been changed a little bit, impacted. Do you want to kind of unpack that so the audience understands, hey, look, Workers' Comp is there really for the long term if it can be maintained?
It can be there for the long term, absolutely, for lifetime. Kentucky, I've been doing this for 30 years now. For the vast majority of the time that I've practiced workers' compensation law, any injured worker had lifetime medical treatment. And that doesn't mean you got a blank check to go to the doctor. What that means is that if the treatment is reasonable and necessary to treat the work-related injury, then the workers' comp insurance carrier is responsible for the payment of it. The comp carrier can say that treatment's not reasonable and necessary, or that treatment's not for the work injury, and then they can force a judge to make that determination from that. But if it is reasonable and necessary and is for the work-related injury, the medical treatment was covered for the injured worker's lifetime. That changed in July of 2018, July 14th of 2018. They changed the law, that legislative session. It became effective that date. And they limited medical treatment to 15 years with the potential for lifetime medical treatment. So you get 15 years of treatment that's reasonable and necessary for the work-related injury, and then at the end of the 15-year time period, you can ask a judge to continue the medical treatment for the rest of your life. And ultimately, that's going to be the judge's determination.
So that's not in another 15 years. That's from this point forward.
15 years from the date of injury.
Yeah.
In injuries that occurred before July 14th, 2018 are still lifetime. You don't have that 15-year time period.
Okay.
It did not apply that 15-year cap to prior injuries, just from injuries from that date forward.
So they were grandfathered. So
they were grandfathered in. The law in effect on the date of the injury is what controls them. And so in exactly how that process is going to be, we don't really know yet. They've already done some regulations to address that, but nobody's ever reached that 15-year cap because it just come in 2018, so it's just been in for a few years now. I guess 5 years now, and so exactly how that's going to look, we don't know. What the process at least looks like right now is about 6 months before the Department of Workers' Claims will send the injured worker a letter. They've gone to getting the email of the injured workers and phone numbers as well. So they will try to contact the injured worker and say, the end of 15 years is coming up. You've got a certain deadline to ask, within which to ask the judge to continue your lifetime medical and file medical evidence supporting the need for lifetime medical. Once they do that, then the insurance company would be able to respond to that. And then ultimately, a judge is going to decide exactly what that's going to look like.
We just don't know yet.
Yeah, we just don't know what that's going to be because the regulations could change, and frankly, the statute could change again between now and then. So we just don't know what it's going to be.
Well, and I think from the standpoint of the victim, the person who was injured, one of the challenges is, what if I've moved 2 or 3 times during that 15-year period, and the state doesn't have my current address, and so those forms get sent out to an old address, and they never seem to find me. So there's a risk really to the injured worker in there.
There is, and the injured worker should keep the Department of Workers' Claims notified of changes of addresses and things of that nature. And I've gone to adding that in my letters to the client when we close the file out. The final letter to them says, if you have changed address, make sure you notify them. Change your email address, let them know.
And there's a reason. They're not being nosy.
Yeah.
They need to know because
they need to know to be able to tell you that. Myself and other attorneys had advocated that the time limit should not, or that anybody who did not have actual notice should be able to come back in and ask for that extension of their medical after they are find out. Frankly, I think it'll be on personally, I think it'll be on the insurance company to notify the individual as well, because they're the ones paying the medical bills.
Absolutely.
So they're going to have access to that. If my client's moved 5 times or 3 times since I last represented them, I'm not going to know that. The insurance company is, if they're paying income benefits, they're known to change that from that standpoint. But even if they're paying medical bills, if they're paying a doctor in Murray and then all of a sudden they start paying a doctor in Louisville, then they know the person's address has changed, and they can get
else,
exactly, and they can get that address from the medical providers that are submitting bills to them, and then notify the worker. That's not the way it is now, but hopefully they will come back in and change that some more as time progresses before we get to that 15-year cap.
Well, and that's one of the things that I really admire about you is the fact that you have a history of advocating very strongly for your clients, and you do it not only for your individual clients, but you are an officer, so to speak, in the Kentucky Justice Association, which is a large group of attorneys who actually advocate on behalf of clients throughout the state of Kentucky. And you actually are very involved when legislation is coming up, where you may actually go to Frankfurt and be part of those proceedings just to kind of talk to, hey, let me talk to the people who are ultimately going to make these decisions to really give you a different aspect here. Let me kind of tell you what it's like for the clients. And that's just, Jeff, I mean, those are things that you do beyond just your services to the community as an attorney that I really, really admire about you, because it's not just about the money. And so many people look at attorneys sometimes and go, well, it's just, that's all they're interested in. No, you are there to really help your clients and their families, and you do so behind the scenes in a lot of different ways. I just want to commend you for that.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I've been involved with the Kentucky Justice Association pretty much ever since I started practicing law. The attorney I started practicing with, who unfortunately passed away several years ago now, but he was involved in that organization, and he got me involved in it, and I've been on the board of governors for numerous years, and I'm on the executive committee of that organization at this time. In that, in my opinion, that organization does a lot of good. It does a great job of educating attorneys on how to properly represent their clients and to represent clients to the best of their ability. And it also works in Frankfurt to help address areas of the law that need addressing, as far as making positive changes and helping to stop negative changes to the law that's going to affect the person's ability to seek be able to go to court to seek redress for their injuries.
Oh, that's just a fantastic organization. Jeff, we've got a few minutes left here, and I want to come back. I mean, obviously, we're talking about electrical injuries, and again, we've talked about how this could be neurological. We've talked about how this could be psychological. This could also be physical, and we talked a little bit about the lifetime benefit opportunity that exists under Kentucky workers' comp law. These are devastating injuries, and if it's one of those things where you hit a good shock and you're thinking, well, I'm okay now, shouldn't a client still go get checked out? I mean, isn't that important to that case or to that potential claim?
It is. I think it's very important. If you've had an electrical shock in the workplace, first thing to do is let the employer know about it. Let them know this happened. Especially if there's a violation of lockout, tagout, somebody else removed your lock and tag, and you got injured as a result of it, even if it didn't cause any permanent problems for you, let the employer know so they can find out who did that and correct that behavior, because the next person they do it to could have fatal
may not be that
consequences.
lucky.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But also go see you may not need to go to the emergency room if you're not having symptoms right then and there that are affecting you. Then you may wait a little bit and go to your family doctor instead of going to the emergency room for treatment, but going and having it documented, getting it checked out, because the problems may be latent. You may not realize the issues that you're having right off the bat. You may just think, well, okay, I've had a long day, and that's the reason I'm feeling the way I'm feeling right now. And so having a doctor to look at it to make sure everything is correct. Or you can't tell if your reflexes have been affected, right. Which is some underlying nerve injuries that can cause that. So getting it checked out just to be sure you're safe, and hopefully you are, and you're not injured. But for nothing else, for peace of mind.
Well, yeah, and that makes I love the fact that you said you want that documented, because a lot of these cases really come down to what's in the medical record. What did you report, and what treatment was prescribed for it? Again, you may not notice things that are going on, but somebody else may objectively go, hey, wait a minute, this seems a little off, or your reflexes aren't what they should be, or different things. But you really want to get that documented, because if you try to come back, a few months down the road or a year down the road and say, well, I think this was related to the shock, there was no documentation. And I would think the insurance carrier is going to say, no, we're not going to take the fall for that one.
Almost guaranteed, if you wait several months before you seek medical treatment, the insurance carrier is going to deny it and say, we don't know what's happened in these several months that may have caused this problem. If it was related, you would have sought medical treatment before. From that, guaranteed they will find a doctor who will say exactly that. As well, and the ability or the chances of being successful in that situation go down. The longer you go without seeking medical treatment, the chances of being ultimately successful in relating that back go down drastically.
I think so. And you just said a couple of things that I think are extremely important to stress, and sometimes we stress this in the various workers' compensation episodes that we cover. It's the fact that you have the right in Kentucky to see your own doctor. You'd mentioned go to your family doctor versus, the company doctor, so to speak. Do you want to close out with a little bit of commentary on that?
Yes. I mean, Kentucky law does provide for that if you're injured on the job, you have the choice of your treating medical providers. That's the doctor and the pharmacy, and the physical therapy. Where you go get an MRI, all of those are within your control, not the insurance company's control. There's one limitation on that from the standpoint that if the employer or the insurance company uses a managed care plan, then they can limit you to somebody within that plan. So
but they can't say this physician.
They can't say what doctor within that plan, but they can say, we've got these 5 family doctors in this plan in your area, and you've got to pick one of those 5. We understand you got this family doctor here that you use. He's not in our provider network, so you can't choose him. It's got to be one of these within our provider network.
But that's a very specific situation. Generally speaking, you can go out and see your family doctor.
As a general rule, one of the larger insurance carriers has gone to a provider network recently, so where I'm seeing that more frequently than I did for several years. It's actually very, very rare for a long time that I ever saw a provider network, but I'm seeing it a little more frequently. But even then, they have to have a legitimate choice within that network as well. So if the only provider is a 2-hour drive away, then you're probably going to be able to go to your local guy that you want to see, because that's not really a reasonable option.
That makes sense. Jeff, as always, I really appreciate your insights on this. I mean, in the past 30 years, you've seen a lot of these types of injuries, and you've dealt with them, and you've worked successfully with your clients on these types of injuries. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share your perspectives on this. And I just, again, want to commend you once again for your work with KJA, the Kentucky Justice Association, and some of these other organizations. But, buddy, thanks again for your time. And if someone wants to get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to reach out and say, hey, Jeff Roberts, I think I've got an issue here, and I need to talk to you about a possible workers' comp claim?
Certainly. There's a couple of different ways to reach out to me. The best is to call my office. The phone number for my office, and I've got 2 office locations. I've got an office in Murray, Kentucky. I've got an office in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. But the number to call is going to be the same for either one. We'll schedule the appointment at whichever location's best for the client. But the phone number is 270-753-0053 or 1-800-844-5108. You can also email me at jeff@jeffrobertslaw.com and contact me that way as well. You can contact through the website, but that's going to be an email. Might as well just type the email in from that standpoint. But it's there's multiple different ways that you can reach out to me from that perspective. So.
Outstanding. Jeff, once again, thanks for your time. And friends, thank you for listening. I would encourage you, if you like what you hear here, please consider sharing this episode on your social media so that other people can find out information about Jeff and about the services he provides in terms of workers' compensation, personal injury representation, and also Social Security disability claims. So from right here at the Roberts Law Office in Calloway County, thanks again, and we'll see you in about 2 weeks. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.